Let's take this show on the road. Same-ish, different day. I'll be bored out my mind. Hometown, love my place.
Hey friends, let's dye some yarn. Today we will be dyeing 4 skeins of fingering weight, 75% superwash merino and 25% nylon yarn. And the first thing we need to do is to soak it. So we are going to add about half a tablespoon of citric acid. And the citric acid is what makes it so the dye adheres to the yarn, in combination with the heat and the dye itself, of course. We need water. I'm adding in 2 liters and another 2. And I'm going to pour another 2. I'm using metric measurements. 6 liters is about what I need to be able to soak the yarn properly. And you want all the yarn to be completely soaked, because if it's not, the yarn is not the dye is not going to stick to the parts that are dry. There we go. And to make it easier to detangle skeins, we are using zip ties, and I'm using 1 per skein, like so. I'm using reusables, highly recommend. And this will help keeping the skeins from tangling in themselves or untangling with each other. There we go. And another one. And the last one. There we go. Now I'm going to move to the other side of the camera. And we're going to put these in the tub. And you can use any type of plastic tub that you got. You don't need to have one this big. I just have a big one because I sometimes dye a lot of yarn at the same time. Okay, we have all 4 skeins ready to go. Now we'll just tuck them in the water. And in they go. And you press down to make sure it gets properly soaked, so that the dye will stick to the yarn once we get dyeing. So this is the first thing you need to do before dyeing your yarn. I just squeeze it down. Make sure it gets wet everywhere. Like so. And now it just has to sit for at least 30 minutes. And then we can start dyeing. So we're getting ready to dye. The yarn has been soaking for a little more than half an hour. So we're going to get ready to dye it now. And what we're doing today, we are trying to do speckles only on natural wool. So what we're going to use is, we need our airway protection, because we don't want to breathe in the dye powder. It's very fine, you don't want that in your lungs. We have our dyes. I'm going to be using 3 different dyes from Jacquard acid dyes. I got purple, I've got Aztec gold, and I have got emerald. We have a spoon in case we want to poke the water. We will attempt to not do that though, because then the dye will spread around in the water, and we will try to get some speckles today, so we don't want to touch it if we don't have to. Some spoons to work with. Old yogurt tub that I have some water in, that I can just put my spoon in. Some people like to use these tea strainers to administer the dye to make speckles. I've never found that to be very useful, so I will not be using that today. And we have our citric acid that we are going to use to make sure the dye adheres to the yarn. And I'm choosing citric acid because it doesn't smell at all. You can also use vinegar, but I prefer citric acid. But first of all, we need to get our yarn into the pan. The first thing we want to do is add some more citric acid. I'm going to use about a tablespoon in the pan. And usually when I dye, I will have approximately 3 liters of water in for 4 skeins of fingering weight yarn. Today I'm going to start off with 2 liters. And I have another half liter ready here. Because when I do speckles, I don't want too much water in the pan or the dye will just spread instantly. So we're going to start with 2 liters and see where that gets us. Now, we need to add the yarn to the pan that has been soaking for a little over half an hour. Got them a little bit tangled. There we go. And what we're also going to do today is we're going to twist it a little when putting it in the pan. That's because we want speckles on all sides. There we go. And the next one. Just squeezing out some of the excess water. There we go. We're putting it in the pan. I'm giving it a few twists just to get speckles all over. Next skein. Squeezing out excess water. Just so I don't make a mess everywhere. Putting it in the pan. Giving it a few twists. I'm doing a couple on this end. And lining them up next to each other. And the last one. Few twists on each end. A couple of twists in the middle. There we go. And just line them up next to each other like this. There we go. I'm going to rinse my hands. Since the water is full of citric acid, it might get itchy. And we're going to start heating up the pan. And I'm using both of these burners. Let's get our dye ready. There we go. We're just going to let that heat a little bit, and so that the yarn is warm. Because when the yarn is warm, the dye will hit immediately. So while heating the pan, I'm moving it about to make sure everything gets heated in here. We want all the yarn to be warm. If it doesn't get warm, the dye will not adhere to the yarn. on moving it around to make sure it does. And I didn't add any more water than the 2 liters I started with. So we'll see how that goes. We need to be careful because we do not want to burn our yarn. I'm just pushing it about here. So I want hot water to spread throughout the pan. Pushing it back and forth. Since I'm working with a lot less water than I usually have when dyeing, I need to make sure I don't burn the yarn. I'm going to turn that. Turn on the heat a bit. Make sure I have control. I'm touching the yarn to make sure it gets warm everywhere, starting to heat up. Some spots are still cold. So I just keep scooching it around, making sure it gets hot everywhere. Now it's getting very hot here. I'm just going to turn down the heat way down because we do not need this to boil. Now we are ready to start dyeing. Use your mask to protect your airways because this is a very, very fine powder and you do not want to breathe it in and get it in your lungs. So mask on. And I'm going to put on some gloves. So, go. I'm just going to make some small ridges here. Just to make sure that we're not all the way down in the water everywhere. Okay, so the dyes we're using, Jacquard Acidized Aztec Gold, we're using Emerald, and we are using Purple. And today, I think we're going to start with the Aztec Gold. I'm going to take a little bit and put it in my hand, and we'll use our fingers to speckle today. And less is more when it comes to dyes. There we go. Changing to clean gloves because I got some steam on the other ones and made them messy. So we're gonna go for the emerald green now. Get a new spoon. I'm just grabbing a little bit, putting it in my hand. I'm working with my fingers. Oh, that was a lot. So it spreads immediately if it hits some water. That's okay. Those things happen when we hand dye yarns. And we're going to do a little bit of purple. Same thing. Just adding a tiny bit to my hand. Now I'll use my fingers to speckle ever so slightly. You can tell the green one is very dominant. And we'll have a tiny little bit more of the purple one. Why not? Something like that. And now we do not touch the yarn at all, because if we do, it will spread even more. But now we got a yarn that is mostly speckles. There are a few spots of bigger blobs, but it's okay. I'm going to put the lid on to keep the worm inside. To make sure that the heat sets the dye in combination with the citric acid. The yarn has been sitting with the lid on for about 5 minutes to trap the heat in. I'm really happy with this. So we're going to turn off the stove completely. And we're going to lift the pan aside to let it cool off. And remember, when rinsing the yarn, it needs to be absolutely cooled down, completely. So it needs to be cold when you put your hand in it. So we're setting the pan aside. It's going to sit for a few hours. Then we'll rinse it and see what we got. It is time to rinse our speckles. It's looking very good. I have a plastic container to rinse my yarn. You don't really need that. You can rinse it directly in the sink if you want. If you have another space that's better for you. I just prefer this one. We're going to add in cold water. And I'm also using a bit of soak. This is my favorite go-to for rinsing yarn. You don't need to have it. I just enjoy it. You can use dish soap, you can use shampoo, you can use whatever you're comfortable with. The good thing about this one is that you don't have to rinse it out. You just need to rinse your yarn once. You can also use this for lingerie, by the way. But I usually do rinse twice anyway, just to make sure. But if you use dish soap or anything else, you will need to rinse several times. I like this one. That's my go-to. Okay, we have some water. Now let's see what we've got here. Well, we do have a lot of speckles, that's for sure. Putting it in the water. As you can see, the water in the pan is completely clear. So we did exhaust completely. Which is good. That's what we're looking for. Sometimes there will be a little extra dye that hasn't exhausted completely. That usually happens when you're dyeing very strong colors. It's usually okay too. But this is what we're going for. The water is completely clean. Here we are. I'm just going to pour out this water. There we go. I'm just going to poke this a little, not too much. I don't want it to tangle, if I can help it. And I just have this small bowl to put them in while rinsing. I'm just squeezing the water out. Not twisting the yarn. You can also use a salad spinner for this if you have one. Just make sure that it's not one you use for food as well. I prefer to just use my hands though. Here we go, and the last one. See if we can find the zip tie. There it is. Tiny, tiny tangle. There we go. And we're squeezing out the water. And I'm just going to pour out this water. Add in some clean water. I just do one more rinsing, even though it's technically not necessary. I just like to be on the safe side. I'm going to fill it about halfway. That's enough. I want the yarn to have a little bit of space to move in. Also make sure to rinse the zip ties properly because there might be some dye specks on them too. You'll get dye all over your hands. So make sure you dunk them too in the water. Yeah, I think that's good. And we'll just add them in again. Try to set them in side by side here. There we go. That's really all we need. I'm going to catch the zip tie. it a couple of times. Squeeze out the water. And again, I'm not twisting the yarn, I'm just squeezing the water out. Look at those speckles. That's really cool. There we go. And the third one. And squeezing out the water. And the final one. And there we go. That's it. We are going to hang them to dry. I just use a regular clothing rack. And in a couple of days it will be dry. And I'll show you the finished result. And the finished result, we do have some very lovely speckles in this yarn. I really love how this came out. It's a simple thing. Just a natural yarn and some different colored speckles, and it makes all the difference in the world. Please let me know if you dye some or speckle some yarn yourself. I would love to see it. So tag me on social media. And also if you knit something with your hand-dyed yarn, I would love to see that as well. So yeah, I'll see you in the next one.